The first thing Waverly ever said to me was that my coffee order was aggressively boring. I was standing in line at the Tim Hortons on King Street, the one squeezed between a dry cleaner and a cell phone repair shop, and I just ordered a medium double-double, same as I always did, same as probably half of everyone in that line. She was behind me. I didn't even know she was talking to me at first. Double-double, she said, like she was reading a medical diagnosis out loud. Classic. I turned around. She had paint on her forearm, a streak of cadmium yellow that went from her wrist almost to her elbow, and she was looking at me like she was waiting to see if I'd take the bait. "It's a good order," I said. "It's a safe order. Not everyone needs their coffee to be an adventure." She smiled at that. Not a big smile. Just the corners of her mouth, like she was filing something away. "Fair enough," she said, and ordered a large black with 1 sugar. That was October. We were both 27. She was renting a studio space in the building where I worked as a property manager, one of those old converted warehouse buildings near the waterfront in Hamilton. My job was mostly maintenance calls and lease renewals, and making sure the freight elevator didn't trap anyone on the 3rd floor, which it did with some regularity. Her job, as far as I could tell, was to fill large canvases with colors that shouldn't have worked together, and somehow always did. We started getting coffee at the same time most mornings. Not by arrangement, at least not at first. She kept odd hours, and so did I, and we both showed up at that Tim Hortons somewhere between 8 and 9, and after a few weeks it just became a thing. We'd walk down together. She'd make fun of my order. I'd tell her she was overthinking everything. We'd stand outside for a while and drink before we went back to the building. I liked her a lot. More than I'd admitted to myself for longer than I should have. The thing about Waverly was that she took up space in a way that had nothing to do with volume. She wasn't loud. She didn't dominate conversations. She just had this quality of being entirely present, of paying actual attention. And when she looked at you while you were talking, you felt like whatever you were saying actually mattered. I hadn't met many people like that. I wasn't sure I'd met anyone exactly like that. I told myself it was just friendship. I was good at telling myself things. By January, we were doing the coffee run every morning, without discussing it. By March, I had a spare key to her studio, because she locked herself out twice in 1 week. By May, I knew which of her pieces she was proud of, and which ones she'd painted over before anyone could see them, and she knew that I'd wanted to study architecture. Before I decided the debt wasn't worth it, and took the property management job. Instead, a decision I'd never told anyone else, because it embarrassed me in a way I couldn't fully explain. Her boyfriend's name was Harrison. He showed up in February, a few weeks after she mentioned she'd started seeing someone. He worked in finance in Toronto, and drove up on weekends in a car that probably cost more than I made in a year. He was tall and well-dressed and perfectly pleasant, and I disliked him with an intensity I had no right to feel. I never said that out loud. Harrison came up most weekends through the spring. Sometimes Waverly would mention what they'd done. Dinner at Quatrefoil, a drive up to Blue Mountain, a show in Toronto, and I would nod and say that sounded nice. And it did sound nice, in the way that things you have no access to always sound nice when someone describes them. I kept my feelings in a box. I was meticulous about it. I'd had some practice. When I was 23, I'd told a close friend that I had feelings for her, and she'd been kind about it. Genuinely kind. But things were never the same after that. We drifted. I don't blame her, but I'd made a rule for myself after that. A private rule. Never say it, unless you're sure it won't cost you the friendship. And with Waverly, I was never willing to pay that cost. She was too important. The mornings were too important. The key in my pocket was too important. So I kept the box shut. Summer came. The building got hot in a way that old converted warehouses do. The brick holds heat through the night and releases it slowly, and by July the common spaces were stifling by noon. Waverly propped her studio door open with a chunk of limestone she'd picked up somewhere along the escarpment, and sometimes when I was doing my rounds, I could hear music coming out of her space and smell turpentine and linseed oil, and I'd stop outside for a second longer than I needed to before moving on. One evening in August, I was finishing up some paperwork in my office when she knocked on the door. It was late. After 7. The building mostly empty. She asked if I wanted to walk down to Pier 4 with her. She said she needed air. We walked along the waterfront. It was still warm. The sun doing that slow Canadian summer thing, where it doesn't really set until nearly 9. The sky going orange and pink over the bay. The steel plant across the water lit up like something industrial and somehow beautiful. We got gelato from a cart near the splash pad and found a bench and sat down. She was quiet for a while. That happened sometimes. With Waverly, silence didn't feel like something that needed to be filled. Then she said, "Harrison and I broke up." I looked at her. She was watching the water. Her gelato was starting to drip onto her hand and she didn't notice. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, you're not." She said it lightly, without accusation. Almost amused. I didn't say anything. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not devastated." That's kind of the problem, actually. I think I stayed in it longer than I should have, because ending things felt like more energy than I had. And that's not fair to him. I thought about Harrison in his expensive car driving back to Toronto, and felt something that was probably guilt, and probably relief in equal measure. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah." She finally noticed the gelato dripping and dealt with it. "Honestly, yeah. I just needed to tell someone." She'd told me. Out of everyone she could have called or texted or walked over to, she'd come to my office and knocked on my door. I filed that information away carefully and didn't do anything with it. We sat there until it got dark. We talked about other things. She had a show coming up at a gallery on James Street North in October. And she was nervous about it, in a way she hadn't admitted to anyone, she said. She felt like the new work was too personal, and she wasn't sure she wanted people to have that much access to her. "That's probably why it's good," I said. She looked at me. "You haven't even seen it." "No, but that's usually how it works, right? The stuff that feels too exposed is the stuff that actually reaches people." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should have studied architecture." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. September arrived, and I noticed things shifting, though I couldn't have said exactly what was shifting, or in which direction. We still did the morning coffee run. But sometimes, in the evenings, she'd text to ask if I'd eaten, and if I hadn't, she'd say she was making something, and there was too much of it. I'd go up to her studio, and we'd eat at the little table she'd pushed against the window, the one that looked out over the parking lot and the train tracks, which sounds unromantic and was actually somehow nice. One Saturday she dragged me to the farmer's market on James Street. I pushed the canvas bag while she picked out things and put them in. Fingerling potatoes, a bunch of kale, a wheel of aged cheddar from a farm in Lanark. She talked to every vendor. She asked questions about growing seasons and cheese cultures and heritage grain. I trailed along and felt extraordinarily content, in a way I didn't examine too closely. On the walk home, she handed me half a cinnamon roll from a bakery she'd stopped at. "You've got a little." She reached up and touched the corner of my mouth, a small automatic gesture, and then she went still for just a second before pulling her hand back. Not a long pause. Barely noticeable, but I noticed it. I didn't say anything, neither did she. October arrived and with it the gallery show. It was a Friday evening, the kind of crisp, clear October night that makes Hamilton look like a different city. The old downtown lit up, and people out on James North. The galleries all open, wine in plastic cups, art students and young professionals, and retired couples all mixed together on the sidewalks. I got there early. I'd bought a new shirt for the occasion, which I would not have admitted to. Waverly's show was in the middle room of a narrow gallery that used to be a hardware store. The original tin ceiling still intact, the walls painted white. Her pieces were large, most of them 4 or 5 feet across, and they did that thing I'd noticed before where the colors shouldn't have worked but did. A lot of yellow and gray. One piece that was almost entirely a dark teal, with a single pale stripe through it that I couldn't stop looking at. People were already inside when I got there. I found a spot against the wall and waited. She came out from the back and saw me immediately. She was wearing a dark green dress, and her hair was up, and something about the combination of those facts made me stand up slightly straighter. "You came early," she said. "Didn't want to miss anything." She looked at me for a second. "How do I look?" I said. "You look beautiful, Waverly." I meant it the way you mean things that are true, but something about how I said it, the steadiness of it, or the lack of any qualifier, or something I couldn't identify, made her expression change in a way I wasn't prepared for. She said, "That wasn't a friend tone." She said it quietly, not an accusation, more like she was saying something out loud that she'd been thinking for a while. Like she was putting a word to something that had already existed. I didn't try to walk it back. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I was tired of the box. "No," I said. "I guess it wasn't." She looked at me for a long moment. People were moving around us, looking at the paintings, talking, pouring wine. We were standing in the middle of all of it and everything else had gone a little muffled. "Okay," she said. "Just okay." Then someone called her name, and she turned and went to greet them, and I stood there in front of the dark teal painting and breathed. She was preoccupied for the rest of the evening, the way you have to be when it's your show, and there are people to talk to and things to explain, and wine to accept graciously. I didn't try to catch her eye or hover. I looked at the paintings, genuinely looked at them, and talked to a sculptor named Dwight, who rented a space 2 floors above mine, and had opinions about the provincial funding for the arts that he was very willing to share. At the end of the night, when most people had cleared out, she found me. She said, "Walk me home?" We walked. It was only 6 blocks. The night had gotten colder and she had her coat on but she hadn't buttoned it, and she was carrying a small bouquet of flowers someone had given her, holding them loosely at her side. We didn't talk much. There wasn't a lot to say, or there was too much, and either way the walking seemed like enough. At the door of her building, we lived in the same building, technically. Her studio was also where she slept on a fold-out behind a curtain, which she'd mentioned once, like it was an embarrassing fact, and I'd always thought of as the most Waverly thing imaginable. She stopped and turned to look at me. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said. "It was 20 minutes ago." "I know." She smiled a little. "I can think fast." I waited, she said. "I don't want to mess this up." "Neither do I said. "That's been the whole problem." She laughed at that, a short real laugh, the kind she made when something caught her off guard. "Yeah," she said. "Okay. That tracks." We stood there on the sidewalk for another minute. The traffic on the main street behind me was thinning out. Somewhere a block over someone was playing music, something with a lot of bass. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. How long have you?" She paused, reconsidered. "Never mind. I already know the answer." I didn't ask how she knew. I had a feeling she'd been paying the same quality of attention to me that I'd been paying to her, and that she'd arrived at her conclusions in her own way and at her own pace, and that this was actually fine. She said, "I need to sleep, because I have a lot of feelings right now and I process better after sleep. Is that okay?" "That's very okay. And tomorrow morning?" "Coffee," I said. "Same time." She nodded. "Same time." She reached out and very briefly put her hand on my forearm, and then she went inside. I walked back to my office. My apartment, technically same building, 2nd floor, a perk of the job, and sat down on my couch and didn't turn on the television. I just sat there for a while in the quiet. in the particular feeling of something that has been closed for a long time beginning, slowly and with great care, to open. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of October morning in Hamilton, where you can see your breath and the light does something interesting with the brick on the old buildings. All amber and shadow. I was waiting in the lobby at 8:15. She came down at 8:20, wearing the oversized Carhartt she always wore when it got cold. Hair not quite done, coffee obviously not yet had. She saw me and said, "You're smiling. You're late. I told you I needed to process." She pushed the door open. "Come on." We walked to the Tim Hortons on King. The line was the usual length. When we got to the counter, I ordered a medium double-double, same as always. Behind me, I heard her say, "You know, there's nothing wrong with a safe order." I turned around. She was looking at me with that almost smile, the one that filed things away. "I know," I said. She ordered her large black with 1 sugar. We stood on the sidewalk the way we always did. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at the street. I looked at her. I wasn't careful about it. For the first time in a long time. I just looked. She caught me at it and didn't say anything about it, which felt like its own kind of answer. We had coffee. We went back to the building. She went up to her studio, and I went to my office, and I could hear, very faintly, music starting through the ceiling above my desk. Nothing had happened yet, not really, and it also felt like everything already had. That's the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. That the actual moment when it finally arrives is almost quiet. You wait for it to feel like the movies. Like a door thrown open, like something dramatic and irrevocable, but mostly it just feels like waking up and realizing you already know where you are. Like the room was always this room. Like the light was always this light. I sat at my desk and did my paperwork, and the freight elevator made its usual complaints somewhere in the building. And upstairs Waverly was doing whatever she did in the mornings, with the door propped open and the music on, painting something with colors that shouldn't work together. And I thought, there you go,